Nobody wants elderly people ruining the celebration, Margaret. My daughter-in-law said those words so casually that for a moment, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. I stood in my kitchen holding a wooden spoon, the smell of garlic butter and rosemary still filling the air from the roast I'd been cooking since noon. My birthday dinner was supposed to start in less than 2 hours. The table was already set with my best china. 6 plates, cloth napkins, crystal glasses I hadn't used since my husband Walter passed away 3 years earlier. Vanessa sighed softly on the other end of the phone, like I was the difficult one. I'm just being honest, she continued. Daniel and the others thought it would be better if we did something more modern this year. Less emotional. Emotional. That word settled into my chest heavier than I expected. I stared at the birthday cake cooling on the counter beside me. White frosting. Fresh strawberries around the edges. I had even written 68 carefully in silver icing, though my hands weren't as steady as they used to be. So the dinner is cancelled? I asked quietly. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Vanessa replied. Nobody's trying to hurt you. People just want to relax without feeling guilty about getting older. Then she laughed softly, almost under her breath. You know how elderly people can change the mood. Elderly people. Not mother-in-law. Not Margaret. Just elderly people. Like I belonged to some inconvenient category instead of this family. Before I could answer, she said she had another call coming in and hung up. The silence afterward felt louder than the conversation itself. I stood there for a long time staring at the wall above my stove while the oven timer continued blinking beside me. 6:30, 6:31, 6:32. Outside my kitchen window, the Arizona sunset painted the sky in streaks of orange and pale pink. Walter used to love sunsets like that. He always said they made the whole neighborhood look softer. I turned off the oven eventually. The roast had finished cooking perfectly. Tender. Juicy. Completely untouched. Around 7 o'clock my phone buzzed. For one foolish second I thought maybe Daniel was calling to apologize. Instead it was a notification from Instagram. Emily had posted a family photo. I opened it slowly. There they all were sitting inside a downtown steakhouse under hanging lights and polished oak beams. Daniel smiling with his arm around Vanessa. My grandson Tyler holding up a glass of soda. Even my sister Claire was there. The caption read, "Perfect night with the people who matter most." I looked at that sentence for a very long time. Then I quietly carried my untouched birthday cake to the refrigerator, while the candles I had already lit burned themselves down beside the empty dining room table. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph again. Daniel smiling beside Vanessa while everyone raised their glasses beneath those warm restaurant lights. Perfect night with the people who matter most. Around 2 in the morning, I walked downstairs in my robe and stood quietly in the kitchen. The birthday cake was still sitting inside the refrigerator exactly where I had left it. Untouched. The strawberries along the edges had already started losing their shine. I opened the refrigerator door and stared at it longer than I should have. Then I closed it again without taking a slice. The house felt strangely hollow after midnight. The grandfather clock near the staircase sounded louder than usual, each tick stretching through the silence like a reminder that time kept moving whether people cared about you or not. Walter used to joke that I could never handle a quiet house. He was wrong about that. Quiet was easy. What hurt was realizing that people could erase you while continuing to smile in family photographs. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my dining room table, illuminating 6 untouched place settings exactly where I had arranged them the day before. The folded napkins, the silverware, the wine glasses catching little flashes of morning light. I should have cleaned everything up before bed, but something inside me had refused. It was as if putting the dishes away would make the humiliation feel official. I moved slowly around the table gathering plates one by one. The sound of porcelain touching porcelain echoed through the room. Delicate, careful, controlled. I kept hearing Vanessa's voice in my head. Elderly people ruin the mood. Not old. Elderly. The word carried a different kind of cruelty. Cold and clinical. Like I was no longer a person with memories and history and love. Just an uncomfortable reminder of aging. Around 10 o'clock my phone buzzed again. Daniel. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. "Hey Mom," he said carefully. How are you feeling today? Feeling. Not doing. Not are you okay? Feeling. Like he already knew the answer and hoped I would make this easier for him. I am fine, I said. There was a pause on the line. I could hear restaurant noise in the background. Plates clattering. Someone laughing. About last night, he started. Vanessa probably could have worded things better. I closed my eyes briefly. Probably. But everybody thought a smaller dinner downtown would be less stressful. Less stressful for who, I wondered. For the woman who spent 2 days cooking for everyone? Or for the people pretending I had become embarrassing to stand beside? I understand, I said quietly. And somehow that seemed to relieve him more than anything else could have. After we hung up, I carried the birthday flowers I had bought for the center of the table out to the trash bin beside the garage. Most of them had already started to wilt. For the next few days, I tried convincing myself that maybe I had overreacted. That was the dangerous thing about loneliness at my age. You start negotiating against your own feelings just to preserve the illusion that your family still loves you the way they once did. I told myself Vanessa was stressed. I told myself restaurants were crowded and loud and maybe downtown had simply been easier for everyone. But once certain memories begin surfacing, they do not stop. They arrive quietly one after another, until the entire picture changes shape in front of you. I remembered Tommy's 7th birthday party last spring. Vanessa had called the night before sounding distracted. Oh, Margaret, I completely forgot to tell you. We had to move the party to Sunday. Because Tyler came down with a little cough. I stayed home Saturday afternoon watching old movies while rain tapped against the windows. The next morning, Emily accidentally posted photographs online from the party dated the previous day. Tommy smiling beside a dinosaur cake. Daniel grilling hamburgers on the patio. Vanessa laughing with neighbors while string lights glowed behind them. Everyone had been there except me. When I gently asked Daniel about it later, he sounded confused for all of 3 seconds before saying there must have been a misunderstanding. There was always a misunderstanding. Last Thanksgiving, Vanessa insisted dinner would be very small this year. Because people wanted a quiet holiday after the pandemic years. I spent the evening alone eating turkey leftovers from the grocery store deli, while watching the Macy's parade rerun on television. 2 days later, my sister Claire casually mentioned how crowded Daniel's house had been. You should have seen Vanessa's table decorations, she said before suddenly going silent. Another misunderstanding. Another accident. Another moment where I was somehow the only person left out. The memories kept coming after that. Tiny moments I had ignored because I did not want to believe what they meant. Vanessa cropping me out of family photographs before posting them online. Vanessa laughing once when I struggled opening a medicine bottle at dinner. Vanessa saying things like, "People our age are trying to stay young," while glancing toward me with that polished little smile. Not cruel enough for anyone to confront. Just sharp enough to leave a mark. One afternoon while folding laundry in my bedroom, I found myself staring at an old framed picture from 10 years earlier. Walter stood beside me at the Grand Canyon, his arm around my shoulders while Daniel grinned between us. Back then Vanessa had just married into the family. She used to call me for recipes. Used to ask advice about decorating her first home. Somewhere along the way, her politeness had hardened into management. She no longer treated me like family. She treated me like an obligation everyone else was too embarrassed to mention. That evening I opened Facebook again even though I knew I should not. Vanessa had uploaded another album from the restaurant dinner. In one photo somebody had commented, "Love this adults only vibe." Vanessa replied with a laughing emoji and wrote, "Exactly." I stared at those 7 letters until the screen blurred in front of me. The following Sunday, Emily stopped by unexpectedly around noon carrying 2 iced coffees from the little cafe near my neighborhood. She looked nervous standing on my front porch, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, while sunlight reflected off the windshield of her old Honda Civic parked in the driveway. "I was in the area," she said quickly, although we both knew that was not true. Emily lived nearly 40 minutes away in Tempe. I invited her inside anyway. The house still smelled faintly like vanilla from the birthday candles I had finally thrown away the night before. Emily sat at the kitchen counter while I poured both coffees into proper mugs. Walter always hated drinking from paper cups at home. "Makes the house feel temporary," he used to say. Emily watched me quietly for a moment before speaking again. Grandma, are you okay? It was such a simple question, but I realized nobody else had actually asked me that all week. Not Daniel. Not Claire. Certainly not Vanessa. I opened the refrigerator and pretended to rearrange groceries while deciding how much honesty I could afford. I am getting older, I said carefully. Maybe people just have less patience for older people than they used to. Emily looked down at her coffee immediately. That was when I knew there was something she had been carrying for a while. She wrapped both hands around the mug without drinking from it. Grandma, she said softly, there are things I probably should have told you sooner. My chest tightened before she even continued. Outside, a sprinkler somewhere down the street clicked rhythmically against dry grass. The sound filled the silence between us. Vanessa says things sometimes, Emily admitted. Usually around her friends or at family dinners when she thinks nobody notices. I sat down slowly across from her. Emily swallowed hard before continuing. She jokes that you make gatherings depressing because you remind people how fast life goes by. The words landed gently and brutally at the same time. Emily rushed ahead after seeing my face. I never agreed with her. I swear I did not. Nobody ever pushes back when she says things like that. Everyone laughs awkwardly and changes the subject. I stared at the sunlight stretching across my kitchen floor. A year ago, I would have defended Vanessa automatically. Told myself she did not mean it that way. Told myself younger people used harsher humor now. But suddenly every strange glance and cancelled invitation fit together too perfectly. Daniel hears these comments? I asked quietly. Emily hesitated just long enough to answer the question before she even spoke. Sometimes. That hurt more than I expected. Not because my son failed to defend me. Because somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing the comments as unusual. Emily reached across the counter and touched my hand gently. You are not embarrassing, Grandma. I smiled at her then. A small smile. Tired around the edges. No, I said softly. But I think I have spent years around people who wanted me to believe I was. After Emily left, the house felt quieter than usual, but not in the painful way it had the week before. This silence felt different, clearer somehow, like a fog had finally started lifting from rooms I had spent years walking through half asleep. I washed our coffee mugs slowly and stood at the sink watching late afternoon sunlight settle across the backyard. Walter built that patio himself the summer Daniel turned 14. He spent 3 weekends measuring wood planks and arguing with instruction manuals while I handed him lemonade every hour because Arizona heat in July could wear a man down fast. Daniel used to sit out there after school talking to us about baseball practice or girls he liked or teachers he hated. Back then, he told me everything. Somewhere along the way, conversations turned into updates. Then obligations. Then silence wrapped in politeness. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Hope you are feeling better. We should all do lunch. Sometime soon. I read the message 3 times. No apology. No acknowledgement of what happened. Just another smooth layer placed carefully over something rotten underneath. I set the phone face down on the counter and did not answer. About 20 minutes later, Daniel called. Mom, Vanessa said you never replied. Of course she had already noticed. Vanessa monitored emotions the same way some people monitored weather reports. I was busy, I answered calmly. Doing what? The question slipped out before he could stop himself. I almost smiled at that. For years, everyone assumed my time belonged to them simply because I was older and alone. Babysitting, cooking, hosting holidays, helping with school pickups whenever Vanessa had spa appointments or charity luncheons. My schedule was always flexible because apparently older women were expected to exist in a permanent state of availability. I reorganized the garage, I said. Another pause. Mom, Daniel said carefully. You know Vanessa did not mean anything personally. There it was again. The endless translating. Vanessa says something cruel. Daniel explains what she really meant. Vanessa excludes me. Daniel says there was confusion. Vanessa humiliates me publicly. Daniel asks me to be understanding because she is stressed. I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes briefly. Do you know what hurts the most? I asked softly. It is not what she said. Daniel stayed quiet on the line. It is realizing nobody at that table thought I deserved better. I heard him exhale slowly. Somewhere in the background, dishes clinked softly. Their house. Their dinner. Their life continuing normally while mine rearranged itself around a truth I could no longer ignore. "You are making this bigger than it was," he finally said. I looked around my kitchen then. The clean counters. The quiet refrigerator hum. The framed family photographs lining the hallway just beyond the doorway. In almost every picture, I was the one behind the camera. "No," I said quietly. "I think I spent years pretending it was smaller." After we hung up, I walked into the hallway and began taking several framed photographs off the wall one by one. Over the next 2 weeks, I stopped reaching out first. That was all I changed in the beginning. I did not announce it. I did not make dramatic speeches or post emotional messages online. I simply became quiet. No more good morning texts to Daniel. No reminders about Tommy's soccer practice. No offers to babysit when Vanessa complained she needed a break. I stopped sending recipes. Stopped dropping homemade banana bread at their front door on Sundays. For years, I had been stitching myself into the fabric of that family in 1,000 invisible ways. Once I stopped, the empty spaces began showing almost immediately. On Wednesday afternoon, Daniel called while I was watering the roses near the back fence. "Mom, Vanessa wanted to know if you could pick Tyler up from school tomorrow." I adjusted the garden hose slowly, watching water darken the dry Arizona soil around the flower beds. "I cannot tomorrow," I answered. "Why not?" The question came too quickly. Again, that assumption that my life remained permanently open and waiting for instructions. "I have plans." There was silence on the line. "Plans?" he repeated. I almost laughed at that, as if the possibility itself surprised him. "Yes," I said calmly. "Plans." The truth was simple. I had signed up for a watercolor class at the community center 10 minutes from my house. The flyer had been sitting on my kitchen counter for months. Walter always encouraged me to paint more, but after he died, I slowly stopped doing things that belonged only to me. It became easier filling my days with other people's needs instead. The class lasted 2 hours every Thursday morning. Most of the women there were around my age. Divorced, widowed, retired. Invisible in the same quiet ways I had become invisible. During our second session, a woman named Judith showed me photographs of the pottery studio she had joined after her children moved to Colorado. Another woman talked about taking train trips across the country alone because she was tired of waiting for people to invite her places. Listening to them felt strangely comforting. Nobody apologized for aging there. Nobody treated gray hair like a social inconvenience. One evening, Vanessa finally called me directly. Her voice carried that polished sweetness she used whenever she wanted cooperation. "Margaret, we missed you at Sunday dinner." I stood at my kitchen sink peeling apples for a pie I planned to bring to the community center bake sale the next morning. "I was busy." "Busy doing what?" she asked lightly. There it was again. The disbelief. I peeled another strip of apple skin carefully before answering. "Living my life." The silence that followed lasted just a second too long. Vanessa recovered quickly. She always did. "Well," she said with a small laugh, "we just do not want you isolating yourself." I looked out my kitchen window toward the darkening backyard where the patio lights glowed softly against the desert evening. For years they had isolated me while pretending it was concern. Now that I had stepped back willingly, suddenly my absence had become noticeable. "Do not worry about me," I said gently. "I think I am finally starting to remember who I was before everybody decided I was old enough to disappear." About a month after my birthday, small cracks finally started appearing in the polished little world Vanessa worked so hard to maintain. It began with Tommy's private school tuition payment. Every September, I quietly covered half of it using money Walter and I had set aside years earlier for our grandchildren's education. Daniel once insisted I did not need to help, but Vanessa never argued very hard against free tuition money. This year I simply did not send the check. I did not mention it either. 3 days later, Daniel called sounding unusually tense. "Mom, there seems to be some confusion with the school account." I was sitting on my patio at the time, sketchbook open beside me while late afternoon wind moved softly through the palm trees beyond the fence. "Is there?" I asked calmly. "The payment deadline is Friday," he explained. "Vanessa thought maybe you forgot." "Forgot?" Such an interesting word. Nobody ever forgot my help when they needed it. I did not forget, I said. Silence. Then a careful clearing of his throat. So, should I tell the school the payment is coming later? I closed my sketchbook gently. No, Daniel. This year, you and Vanessa should handle it yourselves. The quiet that followed felt heavier than any argument. Mom, he said slowly, you have always helped with this. Yes, I answered. I also always hosted Thanksgiving. Remembered birthdays. Picked children up from school. Cooked Christmas dinner. Things change. He sounded frustrated now. Not angry exactly. More disoriented. Like someone discovering a staircase missing in a house they thought they knew by memory. This feels personal. I looked out across the backyard where desert sunlight painted long shadows over Walter's old patio furniture. That is because it is. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time listening to birds settling into the mesquite trees nearby. For the first time in years, I did not feel guilty. A few days later, Emily stopped by again carrying grocery bags because she insisted I needed real food, instead of the yogurt and tea she found in my refrigerator last time. While unpacking vegetables onto the kitchen counter, she hesitated before speaking. I overheard Vanessa arguing with Dad last night. I stayed quiet. She said things are getting tight financially. Emily glanced toward me carefully. Apparently they were counting on you helping with more than just tuition. Suddenly several conversations from the past year rearranged themselves in my head. Vanessa encouraging Daniel to ask about refinancing my house, for tax reasons. Daniel casually bringing up retirement communities near Scottsdale. Vanessa insisting I should simplify my finances because paperwork could become confusing at your age. I felt cold despite the Arizona heat pressing against the kitchen windows. It was never only about embarrassment. Embarrassment had simply been the first step. Make the older woman feel unwanted. Make her feel guilty for existing. Then slowly convince her she should hand over control because everybody else knows better. Emily looked at me nervously. Grandma. I realized I had gone completely still. Then I smiled softly and reached for another grocery bag. I think, I said carefully, your grandfather understood people better than I did. 2 mornings later I drove across town to meet Walter's old attorney, Harold Bennett. His office sat inside a quiet brick building near downtown Phoenix, tucked between a credit union and a travel agency that still advertised cruises in its front window like it was 1995. Harold looked older than I remembered. More silver in his hair. Thicker glasses. But his handshake remained steady and warm. Margaret, he said gently as I sat across from his desk. It has been too long. His office smelled faintly like coffee and old paper. Framed certificates lined the walls beside photographs of Harold standing beside fishing boats and grandchildren. For a moment I almost forgot why I was there. Then he opened Walter's file. The thick folder landed softly on the desk between us. Your husband was very thorough, Harold said with a small smile. He always believed preparation was a form of love. Something tightened quietly in my chest at hearing that. Walter used to say practical things in the gentlest ways. Harold adjusted his glasses and reviewed several documents carefully before looking back at me. Margaret, I want to make sure you fully understand your financial position. I folded my hands in my lap and listened. The house remained entirely in my name. So did the investment accounts Walter established years before his death. The educational trust for Tommy and Tyler required my direct approval for withdrawals beyond tuition assistance. Most importantly, Walter had created legal protections preventing anyone from pressuring me into transferring assets without independent review. Harold slid one document gently across the desk toward me. Walter specifically requested these safeguards after Daniel got married. I looked up sharply. Why? Harold hesitated only briefly. Your husband worried that you were too generous with family. Memories surfaced immediately after that. Walter quietly asking if Vanessa had ever pressured me financially. Walter insisting I keep separate banking accounts. Walter reminding me repeatedly that kindness should never require surrendering control. At the time I thought he was simply being cautious. Sitting in Harold's office now I realized he had seen things long before I allowed myself to. Has Daniel contacted you recently? Harold asked carefully. I nodded slowly. There have been conversations about refinancing, retirement communities, simplifying paperwork. Harold leaned back in his chair with the tired expression of a man who had witnessed too many families confuse love with entitlement. Margaret, he said quietly, some people only value stability after they lose access to it. I stared down at the papers in front of me while sunlight shifted across the office carpet. For years I thought protecting my family meant giving more. More time, more patience, more money, more forgiveness. But maybe real protection meant refusing to reward people for treating me like I was temporary. Before leaving, I signed several updated documents Harold recommended. Nothing dramatic. Just adjustments, clarifications, safeguards, small signatures with enormous consequences. Outside, the Arizona heat wrapped around me the moment I stepped into the parking lot. I stood beside my car for a second looking toward the pale blue desert sky overhead. Then my phone buzzed inside my purse. Vanessa. I let it ring until the screen went dark. 3 days after my meeting with Harold, Vanessa invited me to brunch. The message arrived early Saturday morning wrapped in artificial warmth. Family brunch tomorrow at our place. We would really love for you to come. Love. Funny how easily some people use words they never intended to honor. I almost declined immediately. Then something inside me shifted. Calmly, quietly, I realized I no longer felt afraid of seeing them. Once you finally understand the truth about people, their performances stop carrying the same power. Sunday afternoon arrived bright and painfully hot even for Arizona in late September. I wore a cream-colored linen blouse Walter bought me years ago during a trip to Sedona. Vanessa opened the front door with a smile polished so carefully it nearly looked painful. Margaret, she said brightly, leaning forward to air-kiss my cheek. You look wonderful. Behind her, I could already hear dishes clattering and music playing softly through hidden speakers. Their house always looked staged now. Perfect throw pillows. Neutral-colored furniture nobody actually relaxed on. Scented candles burning even during daylight hours. A home arranged for photographs more than comfort. Daniel greeted me in the kitchen while pretending not to study my expression too closely. Glad you came, Mom. I smiled gently. So am I. During brunch, Vanessa performed kindness like a woman auditioning for an award. She complimented my blouse twice. Refilled my iced tea before it was half empty. Asked exaggerated questions about my watercolor class in front of everyone. Emily sat quietly across the table watching the entire thing unfold with tired eyes. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa casually brought up retirement communities again. I saw the cutest place online near Scottsdale, she said while spreading avocado across toast. They have yoga classes and little art studios. It honestly looked like a resort. Daniel avoided looking directly at me. Tommy stared down at his pancakes. Emily stopped eating entirely. That sounds lovely, I said calmly. Vanessa blinked, clearly expecting resistance. Really? She asked carefully. Of course, I answered. At this stage in life, simplicity becomes important. Daniel finally looked up then. Relief crossed his face so quickly it almost hurt to watch. For years my son had confused surrender with peace. Vanessa smiled brightly and reached for her mimosa glass. Exactly. That is all we have been trying to say. I folded my napkin carefully onto my lap. I understand now. The table went unusually quiet after that. Not because of my words. Because of my tone. Calm unsettles manipulative people more than anger ever does. After brunch, Vanessa insisted on showing me updates they planned for the backyard renovation. As we stepped outside near the pool, she lowered her voice slightly. I am glad you are being more realistic lately. Realistic. Another one of those careful little words people use when they want obedience to sound mature. I looked across the patio where desert sunlight shimmered against the water. Age teaches realism, I said softly. It also teaches pattern recognition. Vanessa's smile faltered for only a second before returning. But that second told me everything. She finally understood something had changed. What she did not yet understand was how much. 2 weeks later, Daniel invited me to dinner at their house again. This time the occasion was supposedly casual. Vanessa had finished redesigning the backyard patio and wanted family over to celebrate. I arrived just before sunset carrying a lemon pie from the bakery near my community center. Vanessa opened the door smiling too quickly, like someone rehearsing warmth before company arrived. The house smelled faintly of grilled salmon and expensive candles. Outside, string lights glowed above the newly renovated patio furniture, while soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Everything looked beautiful, controlled, intentional. During dinner, Vanessa remained unusually attentive toward me. She complimented my earrings, asked thoughtful questions about my painting class, even laughed at one of my stories about Walter accidentally locking himself out of our hotel room during a road trip years ago. To anyone watching from outside, we probably looked like a perfectly happy family. That was the dangerous thing about people like Vanessa. Their cruelty survived inside implication and atmosphere, never obvious enough for strangers to notice. Halfway through dessert, Daniel cleared his throat nervously. "Mom," he began, "Vanessa and I have been discussing some long-term planning ideas." There it was. I set down my fork carefully. Vanessa leaned forward with practiced concern softening her expression. "We only want to make sure you are secure." Secure. Another carefully selected word. "At your stage in life," she continued gently, "it might be smart to simplify things before managing the house becomes overwhelming." Emily immediately stared down into her iced tea. Tommy shifted uncomfortably beside her. Daniel avoided my eyes altogether. I folded my napkin slowly across my lap before speaking. "Actually," I said calmly, "I have been doing some long-term planning myself recently." Vanessa's smile tightened almost invisibly. "Oh, I met with Harold Bennett last week." Daniel finally looked up sharply at hearing Walter's attorney mentioned aloud. I continued quietly. Walter left very detailed instructions regarding the estate. The patio suddenly felt much quieter despite the music still playing softly nearby. Vanessa picked up her wine glass too quickly. "That sounds responsible," she said carefully. "It was," I agreed. "Especially the parts protecting assets from outside pressure." Daniel frowned slightly. "Mom, nobody is pressuring you." I looked at him then. Really looked at him. My little boy who once cried because he found an injured bird in our driveway. The teenager who used to sit beside Walter in the garage learning how to sand old furniture. Somewhere between love and convenience, he had learned how to stay silent while other people diminished me. "Maybe not intentionally," I said softly, "but people reveal themselves in patterns." Vanessa laughed lightly, though something strained had entered her voice. "Margaret, you make us sound manipulative." I held her gaze steadily for the first time in years. "No," I answered calmly. "Your behavior did that on its own." Complete silence settled across the patio after that. Even the desert wind seemed to pause. Daniel looked stunned. Tommy stared at his plate. Emily slowly exhaled like she had been holding her breath for months. Vanessa's smile remained frozen on her face, but her eyes had changed completely. For the first time since joining this family, she realized I was no longer asking for permission to exist comfortably inside it. The atmosphere after that dinner changed completely. Not loudly. Families rarely fall apart in loud dramatic moments the way movies pretend they do. Most of the damage happens quietly afterward. In delayed phone calls, forced smiles, silences that stretch a little too long. Daniel stopped contacting me for several days after the patio conversation. Vanessa, however, suddenly became very active. She sent cheerful text messages every morning asking how I was feeling, shared photographs of Tyler's school projects, even mailed me a small bouquet of flowers with a handwritten note that said, "Family matters more than misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. That word again. Always softening. Things that were never soft to begin with. I thanked her politely and placed the flowers outside on the patio table where the desert heat slowly wilted them by evening. 4 days later, Daniel appeared at my front door just after sunset. Alone. He looked exhausted standing there beneath the porch light, tie loosened, dark circles beneath his eyes. For a second, he reminded me painfully of Walter after long weeks at the accounting firm during tax season. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside without speaking. We sat in the living room where the old grandfather clock still ticked steadily beside Walter's bookshelf. Daniel stared down at his hands for several moments before finally speaking. "Vanessa says you think she hates you." I folded my hands calmly in my lap. What do you think? He rubbed his forehead slowly. I think things got out of hand. Out of hand. Such careful language for years of humiliation disguised as family management. Daniel looked around the room then, his eyes lingering on framed photographs and old furniture he had grown up around. I did not realize how much you handled for everybody, he admitted quietly. The school payments, holidays, the boys, even helping with our mortgage during the pandemic. I said nothing. Sometimes silence forces people to continue telling the truth. Vanessa keeps saying you are trying to punish us financially now, he continued. But honestly, he stopped abruptly. Honestly what? I asked gently. Daniel exhaled hard and leaned back against the couch cushions. Honestly, I started noticing things after that dinner. My chest tightened slightly. Like what? The comments. He stared down at the floor. Little things she says about older people. About you. About how depressing family gatherings become when there are reminders of aging everywhere. He swallowed hard before continuing. I guess I stopped hearing it after a while. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not because it was cruel. Because it was honest. Cruelty repeated long enough eventually becomes background noise for the people benefiting from it. Daniel looked up at me then with an expression I had not seen on my son's face in years. Shame. Real shame. Mom, he said softly, I think I let her slowly convince me that keeping you comfortable mattered less than keeping everything easy. Outside, evening wind rattled softly against the palm trees near the backyard fence. I looked at my son sitting across from me and suddenly understood something painful. Vanessa did not destroy our relationship alone. She simply created an environment where disrespect became convenient. And convenience, left unchecked long enough, can hollow out almost any kind of love. Winter arrived gently that year. Arizona winters never looked dramatic the way they did in postcards from New York or Colorado. No snow-covered rooftops. No frozen lakes. Just cooler evenings, softer sunlight, and desert mornings crisp enough for sweaters and hot coffee on the patio. 3 months after my birthday, my life looked very different from the one I thought I had lost. The watercolor class turned into weekly lunches with Judith and several women from the community center. I started volunteering twice a week at a literacy program downtown, where retired teachers helped children struggling with reading. I painted more, slept better, laughed unexpectedly sometimes. The strange thing about finally reclaiming your dignity is how much energy it frees inside you. Daniel visited more often after our conversation that night. Not constantly, not perfectly, but differently, quieter, more honest. The first few visits felt awkward, like we were learning how to speak without Vanessa translating every silence for us. One afternoon while helping me replace dead plants near the front walkway, he suddenly stopped digging and said, I should have protected you better. I looked at my son kneeling in the dirt beneath the pale winter sunlight, older now than Walter had been when we first bought this house. You should have listened sooner, I answered gently. He nodded without arguing. That mattered more than apologies ever could. Vanessa never fully apologized. People like her rarely do because apologies require acknowledging motives they prefer disguising as practicality. But she became noticeably careful around me afterward. Controlled. Polite. Almost cautious. The comments about aging disappeared completely whenever I entered a room. And for the first time since she joined the family, I stopped adjusting myself to keep her comfortable. Harold finalized the updated estate documents shortly before Christmas. The educational trust remained intact for Tommy and Tyler because Walter would have wanted that. But the majority of my estate would eventually go toward organizations supporting older women living alone after widowhood or family abandonment. Harold smiled softly after I signed the final page. Walter would be proud of this, he said. Think he was right. A week before Christmas, Emily came over carrying takeout containers and insisted we watch old holiday movies together like we used to when she was little. Halfway through the evening, she looked at me carefully and asked, Are you happier now? I thought about that question for a long moment while colored lights from the Christmas tree reflected softly across the living room walls. Happier was not exactly the right word. Stronger maybe. Clearer. Less willing to disappear for the convenience of others. I think, I said slowly, I finally stopped treating my age like something I should apologize for. Emily smiled then and rested her head gently against my shoulder the way she used to years ago. Outside, cool desert wind moved softly through the palm trees while laughter from a neighboring house drifted faintly down the street. I sat there beside my granddaughter in the warm glow of Christmas lights and realized something simple but important. Growing older had never ruined any celebration. It had only ruined the illusion that I would tolerate being treated like I no longer mattered.